and lunch is on us. You meet our pastoral staff. We will tell you a little bit about the church. You can ask any question that you would like. We'll give you some simple next steps. You can take a tour of the building, but we would love the honor of hosting you for lunch. You just have to show up. There'll be some signs. You can go back that way at the close of the service, and there'll be some signs directing you to First Look, and we'd love it if you took advantage of that. Well, I want to call you to the best version of yourself. Do you have that in mind? I'm not talking here about the externals. I'm not talking about the kind of car you drive. I'm not talking about the home that you own or rent or apartment you live in. I'm not talking about the money that in your bank account. Not talking about the best version of yourself that has it all on the outside put together. I'm talking about the internals, the kind of person that you are, the levels of love and courage and hope and faithfulness and purpose and joy. I want to call you to the best version of yourself. So I did some thinking and some praying like I do each week in preparing the message. And I thought, how would I sum that up? And I'm going to give you a phrase here. Hold off on putting it on the screen for me for a second. And I want you to see it, and then you're going to have to argue with me that it's not true, okay? Because you're going to go, oh, here we go. But I believe fundamentally that it's true about you and about me. You ready? Here we go. Try this on. The best version of yourself is the most generous version of yourself. What I'm saying is the best you is that version of you that is the generous you. I'm not talking here just about like you're willing to give dollars. We're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. But the generous version of you that's willing to listen to people, that's willing to have a meal with somebody, that's willing to open your life, that has a sense of welcome to people. The best version of yourself is the most generous version of yourself. And I want to talk to you today about a mindset shift that you and I are going to need to undergo in order to get ourselves into that space where we become the best version of ourselves. Here's what we're talking about in this series. We're talking about the spirituality and the practicality of your resources. The only reason we're doing this is because Jesus had a lot to say about it, and we tend here as a Christian church to talk about the things that Jesus said are important. We don't tend, we always do. That's an under-exaggeration for those of you who are new. Here's what Jesus said. Chris read just a little bit of it. We talked about it a bit last week. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus is operating with a different principle than we do in capitalist Western countries like our country. Here's the principle Jesus is operating with. The person you are and how you handle what you have are intricately tied together. We think they aren't. That's not really true, because in our capitalist society, that's not a critique of our capitalist society, I'm just simply saying it's a fact, we have a lot of scripts and a lot of messaging around money and possessions that we've imbibed and said, well, that must just be how it is. Jesus contradicts that and says, in a way you and I don't fully grasp, those things are intricately tied together. Here's the script we've been given about money and possessions. Oh, they're just totally neutral. And what Jesus says is, no, they are not neutral. In fact, Jesus talks about possessions, money, the things that we own, more than he talks about any. Are you aware of this? More than Jesus talks about anything. More than Jesus talks about prayer. More than Jesus talks about heaven. More than Jesus talks about hell. More than Jesus talks about forgiveness. I'm just going to suggest to you, I have this fundamental assumption that I operate with, that Jesus is the smartest person who's ever lived, and so he has the best insight on the most important issues. And it's worth pausing and asking, if the smartest man who's ever lived talked about this a lot, maybe we ought to pay attention to what the smartest man who ever lived is talking about. And we're pausing and we're asking, why does Jesus say that? Well, here's the goal when it comes to your money and your things and your resources and your possessions. Here it is. It's in a word. If you're taking notes, you can write it in the blank. Peace. Anybody want more peace in your life? Anyone want less peace in your life? Let's just do the opposite there. Like somebody's like, yeah, me. I want to tell you two stories to kind of get you in this. Two things that happened to me to kind of help us enter into this whole subject and remove some of our barriers that we might be wrestling with. When I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, I wanted a bike. I'm going to date myself here. I had one of those bikes with the long seat and the banana handlebars. Anybody remember those? And that was the kid bike. And so I wanted a grown-up bike. And you know what grown-up bike was? It was a Schwinn 10-speed with the handlebars that did. Does anybody remember? Okay. Now, Schwinn is now, I think they've made it a brand you buy at Walmart. Oh, no, ladies and gentlemen. Back in the day, Schwinn was it. This was the bike, and so I would go down not to the Kmart, which there was no Walmart then. I'd go down to the bike shop in Omaha, Nebraska, and I would go look in there, and I would go, that right there, that bike, that's going to be my bike. And so I'm 8, 9, 10, whatever it was that I was, and so I told my parents, and they said, well, I guess what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to save. So I allowance and chores, and I saved up, and I saved up, and I saved up, and I saved up. My dad was a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene, Omaha, Nebraska, and we were at this thing that happens annually in Nazarene churches around the world, actually. We hosted it here a few weeks ago called District Assembly. So we were in the great metropolis of Grand Island, Nebraska. Anybody? And we were in some school. They would rent it out so everybody could fit in the auditorium, and I was sitting all the way up at the back. It was one of those auditoriums where the seats did this, and I'm sitting all the way in the back, because my parents are there, and I was forced to be there. They had no child care back in those days. They just shoved the kids in the corner and said, be quiet. And so I'm sitting in the back, and they start talking on this stage. A guy by the name of Jim Deal, some of you know who that is, was the district superintendent of the Nebraska district at the time. And he was standing up, and he was talking about how we're going to raise money for this mission thing. I don't know what it was. I just remember as a 8, 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid, I knew I had like $110. I know that doesn't sound like a lot then. That was like $1 million back then. You remember? And something gripped my heart. I heard them talking about this need. And I sat there because I'd watched my parents give of their resources, their time, their energy. I'd watched them do all that. And so I'm sitting there, and these tears start. I'm like a little kid, right? Tears coming down my cheeks. And I leaned over to my dad, and I'm like, Dad, I'm crying, literally. Dad, I think I'm supposed to give that money to whatever this thing was. And so my dad got up, watched him walk all the way down, watched him walk down onto the stage, lean over into Reverend Deal's ear, and then he pipes up. He says, oh, there's a boy who's saved up to buy a Schwinn bike, and he's giving the $110. I, to this day, get emotional thinking about that story. I'll tell you another story about a bike. We lived in Virginia. I was on staff at a church in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia, and I was going through seminary. I'm really, really bright, so I took a 2-year program and crammed it into 8 years. So I'm there, and I'm taking this program. It took me forever. I did it with no debt. We paid it as we went, and we got done, and I graduated. And one of the volunteers, we were driving in the church van like you do when you're a youth pastor, and we're driving back from some trip down the road. This guy's sitting over here. His name's David, and he was a volunteer and wonderful, wonderful man, very generous in every way. And he just started asking me, he said, what are you going to do with you're going to celebrate, right? You're going to celebrate graduating, and what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. And I said, well, you know what? One of the things I want, and I'm just talking, was just talking, because he's a friend. And I said, I thought about getting a mountain bike, because right across the street from the church building was a state park with all these mountain bike trails. And I was like, I really always kind of wanted to get a mountain bike. I don't know. It's a lot of money. I don't know. So my birthday was maybe a month or so later. And on my birthday, I was in the office, and I came out to my car. And parked next to my car was this bike, this mountain bike. and it had a sign that said, "Happy birthday. Love, Jesus." I was like, what? I still have the Bible. This was years ago, by the way. I know I look so young, but this was years ago. Here's the Bible. I took a picture of it last night. Still have it. Cleaned it up a little bit. Still works. Still a great mountain bike. Why am I telling you those two stories? Well, I learned something from both of them. From my friend, and I went to my friend David, and I said, "This was you, wasn't it?" And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I know it was him. I learned how life-changing it is from getting that mountain. You felt the emotion, didn't you? I still feel it. How life-changing it is to be on the end of receiving. And then from that experience of giving that money that I'd saved, I learned how life-changing it is to be a person who gives. And here's what I discovered in those two stories and many others. That the best version of myself is the most generous version of myself. We talked last week about debt. We talked about how often our treasure is tied up and locked away and we're enslaved. And so that means that as a result, our heart is full of anxiety and fear and at times despair, and there's no peace. Remember, the goal with all of this is that we'd have peace. And what happens when you have debt is you have then no peace. And the reason we said that we're talking about is because this is what Jesus is trying to teach us, that where your treasure is, how your treasure is where and how your heart will be. And you can't have the best version of yourself when you're tied up into debt. The best version of yourself is the most generous version of yourself, and debt keeps you from your best self. We talked about that last week. Today, we're going to talk about how Jesus teaches. It's honestly, no one likes this subject. Everyone's like, "Oh, money in church, sign me up. I love that talk. It's so great." And if you're a guest with us today, whoever brought you owes you lunch today. So you just take them up. Like, we're talking nice, okay? We're going to talk about Jesus teaches this very radical and upsetting, on the surface, teaching about how to secure our heart and find peace. So remember last week we talked about Proverbs 13:7. One person pretends to be rich yet has nothing, another pretends to be poor yet has great wealth. And we talked about how that describes the average person in not only in America but in Wichita, pretending to have something that we don't. And we want you to be free from pretending. And many people pretend like, "Hey, I got it all together," but in reality, they're up to debt, in their eyeballs, up to debt. I asked you to make a commitment, and the commitment was, "Hey, I'm gonna get out of debt," and it could change your life if you did that. And if you haven't taken action on it, still time, no shame, do it. Start today. The key is your commitment. But I also want to say that there are also people in the room here who pretend to be rich, that have nothing, but there are also Christians in the room who say, "I'm a serious follower of Jesus. Like, I love it when we build wells in Malawi. I'm a part of a group. I love what's going on here. Show up, serve." But the reality is that there is zero generosity coming from some of those folks. Zero. I have a friend who's a pastor, and I have more than one friend, by the way, but I do have this one friend who is a pastor. And he was telling me a story. He said he asked his finance team, because he doesn't know the story, and he said, "Can you just tell me, I want to tap into people who are not yet, they're not leading, but they've got some capacity to lead. Maybe they're not invested financially in what's happening in the church. I don't know what those are, but could you look and tell me and give me a list of names?" And so they gave him a list of names. And he invited these people to a dinner, and he was just telling them, his heart for the church, and didn't say why I'm invited you, just like, "Hey, I want to meet you and talk to you." And before he could start in, he said that a lady who was a doctor, brilliant, articulate, bright, intelligent, she said, "Hey," his name's Brian. He said, "Brian, can I share something? I just would like to tell everybody here why I tithe to our church." And then he said she just launched into this beautiful soliloquy about the impact that when she gave to the church, and how wonderful it was to be a part of that, and how God was working in her life, and how it feels so good to know that she's handling her money God's way. And when she gives to her local church, it's life-changing. Now remember, she was invited there because there was no record of giving. And she said, I'll never forget, she said, I have more to say. And he thought about going, oh, tell me more. According to one Christian financial expert, they said that 53% of Christians have not given to their church in the last month. And so it's like this massive elephant in the room. Now, let me pause here because I know the tension goes up whenever I talk like this. So let me help you for a second. I'm not talking to anybody who's not a Christian. So if you're not a Christian, this does not apply to you. You just listen in and go, ha, Christians, I want to watch you squirm. This is for the Christians in the room. And the reason it's for the Christians in the room is because when you become a Christian, you receive the love and the forgiveness of God for your sins. The debt is paid. God does things with no debt. He paid the debt. And then as a result, we turn and we give our entire life to God, body, soul, and spirit. We give our bodies to God. We give what we do with our bodies to God. We give our future to God. We give what we do with our future to God. We give our money to God, what we do with our money to God. And God, when someone is not involved in some of those things, looks at us and says, I don't understand. I don't understand why my followers would do something like that. So here's what I want to do. Maybe you've not understood why it is that it's powerful and brings you into the best version of yourself to give. And so I want to talk to you about that. Now, here's my contention. I've said this to you before. We grow by our commitments, not to commitment. Let me explain what I mean. When you get married, and I'm hoping every single seriously dating, engaged, or married couple will be a part of the marriage conference. It's going to be skill building and helpful. I really, really want you to. You can take my advice as your pastor to say, when you have that discussion, I told you a couple weeks ago, when you have that discussion about the marriage conference and one of you's like, I don't want to go. I'm just telling you go, and then you can just blame me, okay? So show up at the marriage conference. But here's what happens when you get married, and everyone who's been married for a hot minute knows exactly what I'm talking about. You have no idea what you're getting into. You pay all this money, and you look all pretty, and I do your wedding. Sorry. Slip of the tongue. Didn't mean it. I'm happily married. I love my wife. I get the best seat in the house at the wedding. Thank you. You talk for a living and see if you ever make a mistake. Yeah, right? So here's what happens is you make the commitment before you have any idea what you're doing. That's actually how you grow. Did you know that? That's the truth in anything. You make the commitment, and then because you've made the commitment, you're like, I'm going to stick this out. So I'm suggesting that the way you grow in getting to the best version of yourself is by making some commitments. And so I'm asking you to make some commitments in this series. Here's the commitment we asked you to make last week. We're going to read it out loud. Ready? Here we go. It's on the screen. I commit to attack and pay off. No one. Hey, let's try it again. Ready? I commit to attack and pay off all of my consumer debt. Now, here's the second thing. If you're going to have a sense of hope about the best version of yourself and have peace around your money and your resources, and I'm going to ask every Christian in the room to make the following commitment before you leave here today. Here it is. You're going to say it out loud. You're going to love it. You ready? Here we go. I commit to tithe 10% of my income to God through WFC. It's a little less loud when that happened, I know. And I'm going to ask everyone before they leave to make a commitment to that. Now, I get it. I also understand there's a certain number of folks who are cynical, and you've sat through these things, and things have been done wrong in the church, or you just perceive it to be that way, whatever it might be, and you're thinking, see, this is just a series because you just want to get my money. No. I'll talk about it at the end a little bit more, but if you think that's the case, I think this is such a powerful discipline that I'm going to encourage you to give to some other local church for a designated amount of time, because I want you to know this is for you. This is something God wants for you in your life so that he's Lord of everything in your life. And I also, next week, we're going to actually talk about building personal wealth and why it's not a sin to accumulate wealth in your life. Why? We want something for you, not something from you. So let me give you 4 reasons you need a discipline to guide your heart. this is true in anything in your life. If you want to be closer as a family, guess what you're going to do? You're going to find some repeated practices. That's what a discipline is. You're going to go, you know what? We're going to have a regular game night. You know what? A couple times a year, we're going to go on a trip. We're going to find a way to regularly check in with each other. You want to get closer as a family? You're going to engage in some disciplines, some practices to move you closer together. If you want to be in shape, then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to engage in some disciplines. You're going to go, well, I'm going to change how I eat. I'm going to think differently about food. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to walk, whatever it might be. You need disciplines because what the disciplines do is they are the bridge that allow you to become the better version of yourself. And it is true equally with your resources, your finances, and your money. And the discipline is this thing that many people in the room are very well aware of, and it's what the Bible calls the tithe. So I want to give you 4 reasons you need a discipline to guide your heart. Here we go. Ready? Buckle up. Number 1, God commands us to tithe. Again, a lot of people say, well, the tithe is a scheme the church came up with to guilt people into forking over cash so the church can pay its bills. No, not in the least. We teach people to tithe. Now listen, I want you to understand, my family and I tithe 10% of our income. Our staff that derive income from the church tithe 1/10 of their income. So I just want you to know we're not saying something and then doing something differently. Why? Here's the basic reason that we do it, that God commands it. It's simply that God said it. Some of you have heard this verse many times. I'm going to read it to you, give you a couple comments, tell you what we learned from it. Here it is, Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. It's the Old Testament. Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You're under a curse, your whole nation, because you're robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing, there won't be room to store it. I'll prevent pests from devouring your crops, and vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it's ripe, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. That is pretty bold. A couple things we learn from this passage. Tithing means 10%. So if you make $100, you give 10. We have taught our kids from the time they were little, whenever they get money, we say, have you tithed on that? A couple of our kids have jobs. Have you tithed on that? We ask them routinely. Have you tithed on it? Have you tithed on them? And they now have taken it on, and they're giving and tithing because this is a command from God. And our tithes he brought into the storehouse. In the Old Testament, that was the temple. And in the New Testament, that's the church. It's the local church. And what we do is when we tithe, we have discovered in our life that God makes up the difference. And Malachi says, but if you don't engage in that, there's this weight. He uses this word, a curse. Curse is when things are difficult. Makes things more difficult. Because there's a principle behind this. And the principle is that God owns everything. The day may come when I do your funeral. And when that happens, we'll have a service, and then they'll deliver you in the box, and we'll stand out underneath a tent, and I'll say some version of what we repeated out on Ash Wednesday, from dust you came, to dust you'll return. You brought nothing into this world, you will take nothing from it. What is that? It's a reminder that what we have is on loan. Here's God's perspective that the scriptures teach over and over again. You and I don't own what we have in our life. God gives it to us as a loan. So when you tithe, what you're doing is you're returning to God the portion that he has entrusted to us. So we don't give a tithe, we receive, we return. You and I return a tithe, and the local church receives the tithe. God owns everything, 100%. What do you have that you have not received? And he allows us to keep 90% to manage for our needs, and then we return back to him 10%. Here's how Randy Alcorn, I'd recommend, he's written several books on this. If you want to dive into this, I'd recommend anything he's written. Here's what he says about it. He says, tithing isn't something we do to clear our consciences so we can do whatever we want with the 90%. That also belongs to God. We must seek his direction and permission for whatever we do with the full amount. We may discover that God has different ideas than we do. And then maybe here's the biggest lesson from Malachi chapter 3, is that God wants you and I to test him. Did you catch that? Verse 10, test me in this. Test me. This is where the temptations of Jesus, in the Gospels, Jesus has these temptations from the devil, and he says, in one of them, he says, you're not to put the Lord your God to the test. And he's referencing there, if you dig back into the reference he's making, you're not to test and wonder if God is with you. God is with you. But here, this is the one spot in the scriptures where God says, no, actually, test me. See. You give, and then you see if I don't take care of you. So that's the first thing. Second, mindset shift, discipline that we need to get to the best version of ourselves. Tithing is actually how people are helped. Verse 10 says, do this that there may be food in my house. Meaning, the house can't operate and do its work if it doesn't have what it needs. We're supposed to, as a church, as a local church, any local church, anywhere in the world, is supposed to be a need-meeting machine. What's so beautiful about the money that you've given to build wells in Malawi is almost all of those wells have been built right next to church buildings. I know we've said that to you a lot. But what we're communicating when we do that is we're saying the local church is meant to be a need-meeting machine. This is why we do the things that we do in our community. It's why you serve over 1,000 people a month who are food insecure through Living Waters Food Pantry. It's why you go and volunteer at Linwood Elementary. It's why we build a home for Habitat for Humanity. And there are so many other needs in our community. Single parents, homelessness, people who are immigrants and don't know what to do, or they're in very dire situations. The mission of the church is a part of that. The church is supposed to be a need-meeting machine. We're supposed to meet more and more. We're supposed to overwhelm the world with our generosity at the way we meet needs for people in our community. People in the community should go, people do what? There's a guy I listened to, his name's Kerry Newhoff. He was a pastor, and now he does leadership, and he has a widely listened to podcast by pastors and business leaders, and one of the top podcasts in the world. And he's a Christian. And he was on a show with another podcast with I'm going to mess up his name. His name's Ramit. He's a famous, he talks about finance. He's not a Christian. And they're having this discussion. And Ramit, who specializes in finances, was talking to Kerry, who's this pastor. And he says, okay, tell me about your finances. And he's talking about, well, my family, we give a tenth. And you could hear the pause. He's like, you do what? He couldn't believe it. You give how much money away? What? The local church is meant to have that effect on people. They're like, what would cause anybody to do that? That's what the local church is supposed to be. Let me give you an analogy of what we're trying to accomplish as the local church. I'll use the analogy of a computer. A computer has basically two things that make it operate. Number one, you have the software that runs what you see, and then you have the hardware. And what we want to do as a local church is we want to change people's software. Your heart is the software. We want to change the software of the human heart. We want people to know Jesus. We want them to know the love of God. We want them to be forgiven for their sins. We want them to be baptized. We want them to be in a group. We want them to grow. We want them to find a place to serve. We want to change the software of people's lives. That's the mission of any local church. And then, we want to bring people to Jesus, and then we want to take Jesus and the goodness of Jesus to the world, and we want to work on the hardware. We want to change the living conditions of real people who are going through suffering. We want to make a difference with no hiccups. And tithing is the funding strategy. I have crunched the numbers on this numerous times. If everyone who said, yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus, tithed, or at least gave a significant percentage of their income, no local church anywhere would ever ask for money for anything. I've crunched the numbers. Like, never. There would be a surplus of ability. And so as it is, any local church is this way for the most part. We continually have to say no to opportunities because we're like, and we pick and choose because resources are limited. Now, here's what people say. They go, well, I don't want to give money, so I'll give my time. Hey, please give your time. That's necessary. There was a brief period early in our marriage where we didn't tithe. It was like a 2-year period. And I was working a job. I was going to seminary, ironically, working a job in a corporate business. And we just thought, we don't need to do that. And I remember I was standing, I've told this story before, I was standing one day at a shirt rack in a mall. I'm flipping through these shirts. And I had a closet full of shirts. And I remember the feeling, I thought, is this my life? Just going to go get more for me? And here's how I rationalized it. Well, I serve. I give my time. And I realized in that moment, though, that my life was really about me, and I didn't like the feeling. Listen, there's also a place for you giving to the poor. I have a friend, this same pastor friend, who this is one of his practices, is he takes $60 a month, he puts it in cash in his wallet, and he said, I whenever anybody comes and asks me for money on the street, he said, that I take it out. Sometimes I give them the whole 60, sometimes I give them 10, whatever I feel like in the moment. And it's a wonderful thing. You're like, we need to be those kinds of people that do those kinds of things. And it tenderizes your heart when you do things like that. Now, you may say, well, people will misuse it. Guess what you're going to do with the money? You're going to go buy Krispy Kreme donuts and clog up your arteries. And you're going to judge them because you're afraid they're going to misuse. Like, okay, that's not here you go. Do with it what you will. All of the world religions operate this way. If you're in Islam, you are required to give 2.5% of your income. If you're a Mormon, you have to get your car. I've worked for a Mormon for a little bit, and you have to get this. If they ask you, they say, "Show me your pay stubs." We're not doing this, by the way. They show me your pay stubs, and if you're not giving a tenth of that, you don't get your little card. And if you die without that card, you're not going to rule on your planet like Mormonism teaches. Atheism, like, what do you give? Nothing, right? That's why you don't see any hospitals. The atheist hospital. No, it's always St. Francis or the Wesley Hospital, named after John Wesley, right? Anglican clergyman in England. So this is how the needs are met, is through tithing. Number 3. Tithing witnesses to my heart. Jesus says it again, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And Jesus is saying you can use your treasure to witness to your heart. And what you're doing when you take your treasure and do something specific with it, it's a tangible way of demonstrating to your own self and to God that I'm all in. Do you know the first commandment of the 10 commandments? I'm going to put it on the screen for you. Exodus chapter 20. God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Can you read there? I think it's in bold. Whoops, do we have that? Oh, no, we don't. I'm just going to read it to you. You shall have no other... Oh, there it is. Can you read that in bold for me out loud? Ready? You shall have no other gods before me. The question always has been, what other God would I be tempted to worship? And if you've read the words of Jesus, you know that Jesus answers that by saying, guess what? The number one competitor for your heart is your money. No one can serve two masters, Matthew 6:24. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot, this is Jesus, this is not Scott, you cannot serve both God and money. In other words, money has a unique ability to master you. And what tithing does is you say to your own heart, even when your heart might resist it, God is number one in my life. Now, why is this so important? It's very simple. God is not going to rest until he is number one in your life. God is not giving up on this. No other gods before me. No other gods before me. And so you can say that you are a Christian all you want. You can go on mission trips, be involved in a group, read the Bible, share your faith. But until God has actual control of your resources, then you're in a position of posing. And I don't want you to pose. Again, Jesus, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In other words, where you put your money is the best indicator of where your heart is. And so we talked last week about making a list of your debts, beginning to pay them off. Start with the smallest, snowball that into paying off all of your debt. If you're in debt, just don't go into more debt. That's a whole thing. But the first thing we have to put into our budget is the 10% we're taking right off the top. Okay, now hang on. Proverbs 3, 9, and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits. Do you know what the first fruits are? The first fruits. Not the last, Because the idea is we'll go, well, I've got all these other things, God, and I don't want to, I might not have enough, so I want to hold back. Listen, I'm going to be the last person to tell you that I'm asking you to do something easy. If we're all honest, it's hard, it's painful, and you'll be tempted probably every single paycheck to say, not this week. Your transmission will go out, or some other unexpected expense will come up. A little story. I don't tell preacher stories like this, but this is a preacher story of a little boy who's going to church, and he's got 2 quarters, and he's rubbing them together, and he's excited because he's going to give one. He's going to give one. He's like, God, I'm giving you a quarter. And he's playing with them, and one of the quarters drops and rolls into the sewer. He runs over. He tries to reach in and get the quarter out of the sewer. He can't, so he looks up and he says, sorry, I lost your quarter, God. Here's the last thing. Tithing makes my faith tangible. Tithing makes my faith tangible. The goal is that you and I become like Jesus. God is a giver. Jesus on the cross gave. And we are invited to become like God. That's the invitation. Again, another little preacher story about this man who's reaching down. There was a scorpion who was in water. And he was going to not make it. So this guy reaches down with his friend and he grabs the scorpion, and like a scorpion would do, the scorpion stings him. And the friend says, why would you do that? To which the man replies, it might be in the scorpion's nature to sting, but it is in my nature to save. It is in God's nature to give and to rescue and to save. That's what God's like. If you're wondering what God's like, that's what God's like. And listen, every great person I know, and I have been privileged from my seat as a pastor to meet some of the most wonderful people in the world in multitude of places, including right here in Wichita, Kansas. Every single great person I know who is a follower of Jesus, to a person, were generous givers. To a person. And I've discovered that generous people are always happy people. Because there is no better feeling in the world. You could ask the folks who went to Malawi, and we're standing there at those wells in Malawi fighting back the tears. Why are we fighting back the tears? Like, this changed these folks' life. And we're fighting back the tears because there is no better feeling in the world than giving. Again, test me in this, says the Lord, and see if I'll not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing there will not be room enough to store it. Test God. Now, I get it. If you give away 10% of your income and you manage the remaining 90%, can I just tell you some things I have personally observed in people's lives and they've told me when they began this journey? I'm just going to list them for you. They got raises and bonus and gifts unexpectedly. There was less fighting between spouses. There was miraculous health changes. They were able to keep their job in the middle of a difficult economy. They lost their job and then ended up getting a job that God wanted them to have that was better. They were able to curb their spending impulse. They were given a desire and a motivation to save. Their anxiety about money went down and their peace went up. They were able to meet a need that might arise through somebody else. They were forced to reduce their lifestyle, and that showed them how they were relying on things and not on God. They were given ideas about how to make more money. Doors were open for them to get a new job. I'm not trying to say, listen, you do this, God does this. This is not tit for tat. I'm not talking about a vending machine experience. I'm simply saying when you exercise the giving muscle, you grow. And there are a lot of people sitting in here who would tell you this simple fact: you cannot outgive God. You just can't. It's just not possible. Remember Jesus, I'm going to close with this, and remember Jesus said that, we have 2 choices, that we can take our money and we can spend it on things where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. Do you know that? I just want to suggest Jesus is saying there's two ways you can give. You can do what I'm going to call moth and rust giving, or you can do kingdom living. Then he says, and then so where your treasure is, there your heart is going to be also. So I got a chart for you. If you have been here for a while, you know my affinity for a good chart to be life-changing. And so I've got a chart for you. Moth and rust giving goes like this. Because you're giving your money to something when you're investing it in things where moth and rust can destroy it. Here's what you do. You give to get, right? Kingdom giving is you give because you've been given to. You understand that God's given to you, and it's a response. Moth and rust giving is for something temporary. Kingdom giving is for something eternal. You're investing in something that will last forever. Moth and rust giving is all about the ROI, the return on investment. I want to see the return on my investment. Where kingdom giving is, I'm going to call it parental giving. Do you know how you do it as a parent when you give? You're giving not to see an immediate return on the investment. You just know, I'm doing this to invest in this child so that they will grow. Right? You're an endless ATM at some point. I understand now as a parent of teenagers, you're like, you need how much for what? I'm sorry? Parental giving. Moth and rust giving is you're giving to something. Kingdom giving is you're giving to someone for someone to make a difference. Moth and rust giving is you're doing it either to be seen by people, or some people do it this way so they can disappear from people because they got the resources to do that. But kingdom giving is about seeing the needs of people and doing it out of a desire to see people. Moth and rust giving is about achieving. Kingdom giving is about winning people and meeting needs. Moth and rust giving is stealable. Kingdom giving is compoundable. The best version of yourself is the most generous version of yourself. And we're to test God in this. So here's my thing. The ushers are going to come forward. They're going to hand out this card. We've done this once before. So guys, come on down to the front, or you start in the back, and either way. And we're going to give you a card, and I'm going to ask two groups of people to do two things. If you are already a person who gives, and you already understand this principle, you've dedicated yourself to giving. Some of you tithe, and then some of you give way more than a tithe. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I think there's power in committing again. Yes, God, all of my resources are at your disposal. We have these keys up here at the close of the service, if you didn't get one last week, that symbolizes, God, you have access to everything in my life. And I would invite you to come get a key. I've looked at my key several times this week. And if you have not, maybe you've given a little bit in the past, or you've given some, I want you to make a commitment to begin giving. And here's how I want to ask you to do it, is I want to ask you we're going to call it a 90-day tithing challenge. Meaning, I want you to just try it for 90 days and see what happens as a result. So I'm going to read this to you so we're all super clear on how this works. And I want to tell you, if you're in the mindset of saying, well, see, you just want my money. Okay, if you think that's the case, for this 90 days, pick another local church in town, give to them. Give to them. This is not about us. This is about you releasing your resources to God. So here, I'm going to read it to you. Ready? The first box right there. If this is you, I'm going to commit to begin giving. I would like to test God's faithfulness by accepting the 90-day tithing challenge. I agree that starting next Sunday, my household will give God through WFC a tithe equal to 10% of my or our income. At the end of the 90-day period, if I'm not convinced of God's faithfulness to bless my life as a result of my obedience to His word, then I'll be entitled to request a refund of the full amount of contributions made during this 90-day period. Now, there's fine print. Okay, ready? Fine print. You got to fill out this form. This form must be completed and received by the WFC finance team at the beginning of the 90-day challenge, starting next Sunday. You can take this home. You don't have to fill it out right now. I understand my tithe can be paid online, check or cash, in an offering envelope, so my tithe can be documented. It's going to be, you can't say, well, I gave $1,000. Well, how do we know? I understand that I cannot seek a refund for any contributions made prior to the beginning of the 90-day tithing challenge. You can't say, well, 3 years ago I gave and I want that back. I also understand I cannot request a refund until the 90-day tithing challenge is complete. Go all the way through it. And I understand that any request for a refund must be received by the WFC finance team within 30 days of the end of the 90-day tithing challenge. And you write your name. Your information stays with us. And if that's you, if you want to commit to begin, check the box, right? Remember, we grow by committing before we're able to do it. Or maybe this is you. I want to celebrate this with you. I already give to God through WFC 10% of my income and have seen God's faithfulness in the area of my finances. I commit to give a tithe equal to 10% of my income. I don't need to participate in the 90-day tithing challenge. So I'm going to pray here in just a second. And if you were like, yeah, I need to do this. I need to be serious. Man, mark it. You can leave it in the giving boxes as you go back. I think, Larry, are you motioning to me that you'll receive them? You've got a basket. You can put it upside down in the basket back there. Larry and Lauren are back there. You can put it upside down. They'll take those from you there as well. But I want to ask you to commit. Respond to God. Would you stand with me? Let's pray. Lord, how grateful we are for the cross. How grateful we are that you came into our world. How grateful we are that you didn't leave us in our desperation. You didn't leave us in our sin and tell us to figure it out. You came yourself. You gave. Lord, I fully understand this is such a difficult issue and there's so many layers for so many of us in this room. Would you help us to clear through the clutter, Jesus, and to hear from you what you say about this? To listen to what you say. I've said a lot of words. If I've said it wrong, Lord, forgive me. But Lord, help us to respond to you. What you say is best. We want to trust you with everything about us, Lord. So receive our commitments that we make now, Lord, before you, empowered by your Holy Spirit. Thank you that we're never earning our place. We're just responding to your love. So we respond now to your love, Lord. Thank you for what you've done for us on the cross. We receive its benefits and we're